program does reflect the research done by the participants in the program who are live and in living color in studio and by phone interview. Today, our guest is Sister Sharonne Salaam, and this is an in-studio interview. Our panel consists of
Shirley, Stroud,
Varnum,
Edith, Jenkins,
and we are thankful that they are here and others will be joining us later. The subject of our program today is how children, Black and Puerto Rican children, have been taken from their homes in New York City unjustifiably. These are the stories that you don't hear or read about in the general media. However, they are real, they are happening today. As we see immigrant children being torn from their families and the stories of post-traumatic stress disorder, etc., being applied to these children, how they can't sleep, how they're put on drugs. This has been happening to Black and Puerto Rican children in New York and other major areas and other rural areas of America. Our guest, Sister Sharonne Salaam, has a very interesting story as to how she became involved in this type of work. We're going to start first with some of the cases that she's seen, and then she's going to share with us how she became involved in this work and what she recommends today. Sister Sharonne Salaam.
Well, I have been working with children who have been placed in foster care with their families for many, many years. And it's really a very sad situation for the majority of the children who are placed. Many of them really never recover from the trauma of being removed and placed in foster care with people who they don't really know. In some cases, there is a real need to have some sort of a foster care entity, because obviously if both parents are deceased or something has happened to both parents and they are no longer available to parent, to care for their child, we need to have a place to place those children. But for many children in foster care, the option of the parents, the mother or the father, has been taken away, and the children are arbitrarily placed in a system that's geared toward a money-making venture. It does not necessarily mean that some of those children do not benefit from these programs in being in foster care, because if you're in one of those situations where the mother and the father are both unavailable, then obviously you need to be someplace. And an example of that clearly that we could all understand where parents may or may not be available was when there was the bombing of the World Trade Center. Thousands of people were killed. Many of those people left children who needed to be someplace, and the only option for those children was in foster care. But you find in communities of color that a lot of the children who are in these communities have living parents who might be available to them. And oftentimes what's lacking in those communities are the services that are available to keep these children with their parents. So the option, or the quick option, is to put the children in foster care. And when you place the children in foster care, then the parents are running against the clock, in a sense, to get their children back. Because you really have 15 of 22, 23 months, let's say, to have your children return to you. You might be in a situation where within that time frame, things have not gone your way in terms of getting your children back. And a perfect example of that would be, let's say you go to court and the judge has already told the people who have your children, the Child Protective Agency that has your children, to come in with certain types of information, verifiable information that they were supposed to write a report on. And for some reason, the agency shows up, but they don't have the verifiable information, okay? So the judge will probably say, we're going to give this agency some more time to get this verifiable information, to do this research, to do this report. But the judge never says we're going to stop the 15 to 23 months from ticking while we give this agency more time to do this research and do this paperwork. So no matter what happens, if they show up once, twice, several times without information to move the case forward, many times it's just postponed, postponed, postponed. And before you know anything, your 15 to 23 months, 22 months are up. And your child can be freed for adoption or freed from you. Many times they do not have a place for your child to be housed other than at the agency. That means that there is no family waiting to adopt your child. Now, part of the problem that people have with this type of system is that during this time that your child has been removed from you, the foster care agency is running what they call a dual track. And in that dual track, that means that they know you are the mother and the father and that you're trying to get your child back. But they're also looking for an outside family who would be interested in taking your child if you don't get your child back. So during that process, they might place your child with this outside family during the 15 to the 23 months so that your family, your child and the family would get accustomed to being together while you're going through this process. I hope you all understand what I'm saying.
I understand.
So many children at the end of the 15 to the 23 months will already be in a home. They may have already bonded with these people who are in the home and move on if your parental rights have been terminated. But it's a earth-shattering effect that it has on the child. And so little is done to reunite the child with the parent or even to facilitate visitation with the parent. And I know when you look at that issue in terms of visitation, one of the reasons that is used to terminate parental rights is your being able to come to visits with your child. So if your child is in a different state, if you don't know where your child is, then it's very difficult for you to visit your child. It's very difficult even for you to make the court dates, okay? Because the court case is not going to be where they remove the child from you, but it's going to be where the child is. So that means that, for instance, if your child is removed from you and placed into protective services in Manhattan, and they send your child out some other place to Missouri, then you might have to go to Missouri to visit and go through the court processes within that state. Yes.
But don't they have phone conference now that maybe you can ask for that service?
You can ask for quite a few services. And when you go in, they explain what services are available to you. But just because you ask for the service doesn't mean that it's going to be happening.
That's what I'm saying.
But you have asked for it. You've asked for phone conferencing. So let's say even if it's in the same city, let's say you want to phone conference with your child, you're in Manhattan, New York City, and your child is in Manhattan, New York City, someplace, because you're not supposed to know
where they at,
where your children is within the city. So they have said that you can receive a phone call from your child, I'm just making this up, 3 times a week. And your child in the very beginning really calls you and you talk to your child 3 times a week. And slowly you start talking to your child once a week, no times a week, or whatever. And you go in and complain that this is happening and you're not given access to your child. Or let's say you go to a child visit, and the people who have your child, the EHCR, don't bring him. Then you say, well, what can you do? You really need to have a judge or someone try to enforce your rights to have access to your child. It's like a very difficult process, because one of the things that most people don't realize that's happening is within that time, agencies are making money off of your child.
Yeah.
Agencies are making money off of the services that they say you need. When your child is removed, one of their favorite services to offer is parenting classes. Now, everyone seems to need parenting education once their child has been removed and placed in foster care. Then there are times when you might need drug treatment programs. You might need psychiatric evaluation. You might need a psychiatric evaluation where you have a mental health history or not. Now, the reason you need these types of entities is because each one of these different groups need to receive some sort of funds for the services that they provide to the various people who are there. So let's say if everybody needs parenting, then the parenting industry is making a lot of money offering these classes on telling you how to parent. Okay? Now, it's interesting when you look at just a simple thing as parenting, and you realize that over the years and that we've been a part of the United States of America, Black and brown people have been parenting white children for all kinds of times.
Your life.
But the problem is not with the children that they have been parenting, that they have been hired to parent. So what they're saying is you can't parent your own child, but you can still parent the child that you've been parenting all your life, but you're just not good for yours. You know, it's an interesting type of a concept, and you have to kind of stretch your mind to wrap your mind around it. Yes.
Because my girlfriend, she has her granddaughter. She had to go to classes and all just to be a guardian for her grandchild. And I'm looking at her when she told me that, says, you must be understood this. You didn't hear right. She says, I'm going to class.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to see what they're going to teach me.
Yeah. That's what you
To be a, and I just couldn't understand what she was talking about.
Well,
She had to go to class to be a guardian of her own grandchild.
That's right. She certainly does have to be pass a certain kind of bars that you go through. And if you have a psychiatric history, let's say you had a mental health issue 30 years ago, that could preclude you from having the child today, even though it was 30 years ago, and you worked through your issues. If you had argument and the police was called to your home 40 years ago because you and your husband had an argument, that could preclude you as well. They look at all of these issues, and that's one of the reasons why they say, and I'm sure many of you have heard this phrase, but you might not have thought anything of it. These people were known to us. They were known to us. Now, they were known to us because of the police report from 40 years ago and the incident from 30 years ago, you see? And then they start determining what services you need regarding this. You may go in and let's say your eyes are red, and they might determine whether you're on drugs. They have tested you to see whether or not you have kidney disease or any other type of diabetes or whatever that might be causing that type of problem, but they've made a determination that you need to be drug tested and you need a drug treatment program. Now, the problem comes in when you go to the drug treatment program and they say to you, what type of drugs do you take? And you tell them, I don't take drugs. So the drug treatment program is not going to accept you. So now you are violating what the agency wants you to admit to do for you to get this treatment that you need.
That you
understand?
need based on what they
Based
say.
on their thinking. Based on their thinking.
But now they got a thing out there saying that if you said I don't drink or whatever, they give you a special test with some kind of treatment because they say certain food you eat
So
brings
that's the same
up
thing.
your level, saying that you're an alcoholic and you're not. You
That's-
don't
that-
drink.
Yeah, that's the same type of process. So if you're on drugs, they'll have you go and you take the test.
Mm-hmm.
And most places who are bona fide drug treatment centers, they get their funding from treating people who are on drugs. And so if you don't have a drug history and you can't tell them what kind of drugs you are on and you pass the drug test, then you don't fit into their program. So they can't take you into the drug treatment program so that you can get the help the agency feels you need. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're
so
saying.
if you can't get the help the agency feels you need,
how
then
do
you are, let's say, oppositionally
Mhm.
defiant. You're going against the agency's wish in terms
The
of trying to
agency
get the
being
help.
ACS.
Yes, the protective agencies that is determining what you need to do to get your child back. Now, the same thing is happening with many of the children that were placed into ACS protection. Well, ACS protection and the generalized term protective services, which includes protective services throughout the United States, no matter what it's called, to protect children. So, for instance, children who crossed the border and were placed and taken away from their parents and placed in protective services, no matter what state they were placed in, they still have the 15 to 23 months to get their children back. You still have to show that you have kept in contact with your child, that you are a part of your child's life, okay? So if you don't know where your child is, you can't get there, or if you're in a holding cell where you came across the border in Texas, then you can't get to where your child is in Minnesota to go to the dates. Then your case just speeds right along, and your child may or may not be adopted, or your parental rights may not be terminated, and they might be terminated. Yeah. The problem is, for the children who are a part of this process, is that many of them develop mental health issues because, unfortunately, they do remember who their mother and father was. And part of it is if they start crying and being upset and calling for mommy and calling for daddy and calling for auntie, then the agency's response for that, and they use for the child's protection and well-being, would be to drug the child so that the child can stay calm. Now, let's say you're going to visit the child and the child cries when you leave. Then you have upset the child in such a way that maybe you shouldn't be visiting for a while, because the child is now upset because the child sees you. You're in like a catch-22 kind of a situation in time and the way the thing works, okay?
Sister Sharonne, I want you, because it's obvious to the panel that you know what you're talking about. It's obvious. But there was an evolution, a build up to the knowledge that you have now, which is advocating for the parents. Give maybe the first two cases that came your way, and then you go into how you became involved. Give some of the first two cases that made you say, all right, I gotta do this thing.
Well, we had put out a flyer regarding children in trouble. It said, if your children are in trouble and you need help, come to, at that time, People United for Children, PUC, and there were many people who came. And we had a lady who was working with us who had retired from foster care and the juvenile justice system, Renee Jackson. So she had come and she had retired, so she was seasoned in this field, and so she taught us the ropes in terms of what it is we need to do and how we could advocate for the parents, because we would go into court with them. I remember there was a case where the child was removed from their parents, and the child who was of African descent and placed in a home with people who did not speak their language. I know that sounds familiar because that's happening today. With people who did not speak their language and with people who were of a differing religion. So you have a child, let's say that's Muslim, so now they're going to a Catholic church.
The child don't want to go to church.
And your child might not want to go to that church, or the child might want to go to that church. But in any event, it's different from what it is you are. Or you might have a child who has dreadlocks, and you go to the agency, and the home who have your children have decided that your child hair needs to be cut. You still have your parental rights, but these people have control of your child, so they go and they have your child's hair cut.
They do whatever they need.
You see? So, and then you have really very little recourse in terms of how you move, because the Child Protective Services are there to protect the interests of the child. And our job at People United for Children was to look at the interests of the parents and the child. So we advocated for the return of children to their parents, which is slightly different, and also for services for parents, because if it's going to cost the agency and the state and the cities of New York the same amount of money to place your child in foster care as it would be if you were going to Harvard, then why wouldn't they give you some money? If your issue is you have no housing, because there are a lot of people who are in these places where they lose their housing and they're in shelters, and they have the social workers from the Child Protective Services in all these shelters. So, you know, it can be kind of testy if one of them calls on you. Then they just come, and that call goes to the top of the list, and they remove your child right from the shelter. Now you've been put in another locket because you don't have the child, so what was going to help you get the home placement quicker has been removed. So now you're a single person who is trying to get housing, you see? So it's interesting how they have it set up where it works against you in so many different ways. You know, I remember the couple that I was talking to you about earlier regarding the African couple, when they finally did get their child back, they had to teach the child how to speak their own original language, because the child came back could speak Spanish and English, but they couldn't speak the language they were speaking when they went in there from their own household. So it's like a interesting process, and anyone can call and make any kind of complaint about you. You don't necessarily have to know the person, and you may know the person. The person never has to appear in court, because it's not one of those situations where if someone complains about you, they come and testify, well, I saw Miss Jones doing such and such. It's not that. The agency comes in and they make a determination. Let's say if you're on public assistance, they come to your house and you find your cupboard almost empty because your food stamps is coming the next day. Then they might decide that the child needs to be removed from you because you have no food that particular day. What they feel is not enough food in the pantry. You only have two cans of beans and a loaf of bread. So they feel that might not be necessary or not quite enough. So they'll remove your child, even though you say, well, my food stamps will be here tomorrow. But now, tomorrow, you're going to be down in court someplace trying to get your child. You know, it's an interesting situation how we have it set up in our society in this country.
Talk about the case of the woman with the three children, 2 daughters, going back in time. The 2 daughters They go to a school, and she has a newborn child. That night, the police come to their apartment and said, and the child was supposed to have been hurt. Remember that story?
Go ahead.
Share that.
Yeah. Well, when they come in those types of situations, the child is supposed to be hurt. It's like the people come in, and the first thing they do is start looking through your space to evaluate various things. So if you have a new child, you might not have felt like getting up that day. Things may or may not be the way it would be on a normal day. You know, you might be resting, you don't have help, you got all these children you're trying to take care of. So they'll come in, they'll look through your home, they'll once again look through your pantry and see if you have this, that, or the other. They will examine your child. That means removing the clothing off your child to look at your child's body. Now, depending on the age of the child may disagree with that procedure. If the child disagrees with that procedure, that's something that they will insist, because they're looking for supposed marks, bruises on the child. They're going to want to talk to the child privately in some cases. But as the guardian, you have no case, so you don't necessarily have to allow them to do that, but most people will allow them to do that. And they will question the child in a certain way, where it might seem as if you have done something to the child in some way. You know, you might have yelled at the child, get out the corner, get out the water, stop doing this, stop doing that. So the child is going to report how violent you are in different ways, and that you're talking and stuff to the child. That's mental abuse. You just mentally abused the poor little thing by telling them, don't do this. You know, it's really sad how they have you going.
This is the case about the girl, the teacher having reported the child as abused because she had bumped the knee or something like that.
Oh yes.
Remember?
That was a
It's a husband and wife story.
That was a husband and wife story. The child had gone to school and was playing in the yard. They were doing construction in the yard. So they had all kind of debris in the schoolyard itself. The child fell down in the schoolyard and went home. When the child came back to school the next day, that's when the teacher called in ACS, Child Protective Services, on the home, because the child had been injured, even though the child said that they had fallen in the schoolyard. Who would believe the child?
But shouldn't have the teacher seen those knees before the child went home?
Maybe, but it wasn't reported. There was no report of the child, and the teacher did not report. They just sent the child home. So it could have been that she could have saw the knees before, and she missed it, because you got a whole yard of kids playing. You got some kids playing on this rubble that they know they're not supposed to be on. They fall down. Right away, you don't see a bruise. It takes a few minutes before the bruise shows up. Now, this was near the end of the day, so the child was just sent home. But the child did say what happened, that she fell, she was on this stack of rocks or whatever, and she fell off the rocks, and that's how she got bruised. Okay, but now when you're in that type of situation, the authority to decide whether the child is telling the truth now or later has almost been removed from the teacher. And they have been designated as mandated reporters. So there's a child protective person in just about every school. And they call that person in to question the child and to find out what happened. So the child tells them that too, that the child was playing around on the rocks, fell down, went home, came back to the school, and at the end of the day, the child didn't go home. There are cases where there was a child who was stealing money out of the teacher's pocketbook. So when the child goes home, the parent gives the child a little spanking, send the child back to school the next day, And the teacher whose money had been stolen asked the child what had happened because the teacher told the mother what the child had done. So the child said, well, I got spanked, and that child was also placed in foster care. You know, so you're in a situation whereas you want the issue stopped, like I'm sure the teacher didn't want the child stealing out the pocketbook, but the result of her telling the mother that this is what the child did and the child being punished for that action led the child to be placed in foster care.
Going back to that family.
That family.
I'll retell the story.
Yeah,
Stop me where you remember.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because I interviewed the mother.
Yeah.
Sister Sharonne brought the mother to the station. This was in the beginning of that story.
Yeah.
And when they came to the house that night to examine the daughter, they decided to take the two girls.
But that's normal.
And the parent they had a newborn child, the father's there, and the mother and father the mother wasn't going to let them take the child, and then they threatened to take the baby too. Remember that?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
And so when the story was brought to me, when I say brought to me, when we did the story on our radio show, the communicators, the mother shared what happened, and then they had to take their baby, the baby that was in the house, and have the grandmother take care of the child, unbeknownst to, surreptitiously, so that they wouldn't come back and take the child. The students, the two girls, were taking music lessons, dance. They were being well cared for, and then they went into this home, and then you pick it up from there.
Well, then they were injured in the people's homes. But when you get injured in the people's home, it's very different from something happening to you in your parents' home. And the hammer does not fall as hard when you are in protective custody toward the protection of your child when they have the care. It's an interesting situation. If you complain that XYZ happened, my child was molested, my child was beaten, my child hasn't taken any baths, then it's something wrong with you. That's a sign of your mental illness. Even if your child comes in with marks on them, for all they know, you might have did it, or you might have convinced the child to do it.
But if the child is in foster care, and this child comes and this child has evidence all on their body or whatever, shouldn't they check the foster parents and the child out to find out what is going on?
Well, they should do that, and sometimes they do. It all depends. It all depends. So, for instance, let's say your child comes to you as your child's a baby, and you change your baby's diaper, and you see something that looks strange in the baby's diaper, and you report it to them. The first person they're going to look at is you. They're going to look at you because you're the one changed the baby's diaper. I know we used to tell people when they have home visits with their children.
Don't judge them.
No, we didn't tell them that. We told them that before they take them back, make sure they have reports that, nothing is wrong with the child. The child is in good health. So it's almost like you visit with the child on your way back to the place where you're going to drop the child off. You stop by a doctor. Then they can't blame you for stuff that had happened someplace else, because it's a whole different situation if, let's say, you have a child and your child claims that they were beaten up and they come to you, because we did have a case like that. I don't know if you remember that one, where the child was beaten up in the foster home, and the mother Well, we had told the mother to take the child to the hospital or to a doctor's office because the doctors are not as judgmental, and they would ask the child what happened, and they'd make a written report of what happened to the child within their reports, and it gives you another layer of witnessing that you need in these types of situations. So the mother decided to take the child to the police station instead. So when she took the child to the police station, the police called and confirmed her story that the child had been in foster care and had run away. And then the police told the mother she could leave and they would handle it from then on. But after further investigation, at no time did they ever take the child to a medical physician to be treated for what had happened to the child. They didn't do that. They just waited for the agency to come, pick the child up, and take the child back to the home where she had been abused. You see? So these things happen. So you have to have some sort of sense about it. But the other thing is, if the mother had just taken the child to the doctor or the hospital, the child would have been treated, at least treated. And there would have been a report of it. So this way, they came back and they said how the parent was convinced the child to run away.
The idea is that when it goes into ACS, they cover down to protect themselves. If something happened in the foster home,
that's right.
That reflects on the agency, so they're going to protect. That reflects on the foster, what happened in the foster care facility or home reflects on the agency. So they protect the whole
they
thing.
Want to protect that
And
agency.
the police
protect the whole agency and the foster parents.
The story with the children, the two daughters, is that a year later, I think they came that day, came back and interviewed the mother. The mother was now appeared to be an alcoholic. Maybe you don't remember that. The mother wasn't the same person that came there the first time. In other words, the trauma, what had happened to the family had so disrupted, what happened to the two girls had so disrupted that family that the mother was not the same person that I interviewed. I'm looking at the lady, and when I say an alcoholic, she wasn't the same person. Tell the story about the grandmother living in Manhattanville with the hole in the ceiling, taking care of her grandchildren. Remember that?
Yeah. Well, that case, you're living in public housing, and the ceiling falls, and the ACS is called, and they come and they remove your children and blame you for the ceiling falling. Now, they had her running back and forth to court, separated the children out, the same as they did here, because once they come in, they can remove every child in the house if they choose. Now, the only way that doesn't happen is if the child is old enough to, let's say, stand up to them or decide that they don't want to go, then that doesn't necessarily have to happen. But now that child would be a teenager, able to advocate on their own, who's standing up. But if you got a small child, it's very difficult for them to say, no, I don't want to go. Okay, because they come and they show up oftentimes with a policeman with them. And then they just, take whoever it is out, and they have other police that they can call who are willing to come and assist. So they take the children out of the home and they separate them in different homes for them to stay. And it's a girl and two boys. And one of them was a challenged boy. One was challenged. But when you look at these issues in situations like that, it's illegal for them to take a child from the home and claim that the home was in disarray, is what they said. Disarray, it was a mess, it was dust everywhere, and the ceiling has fallen and you living in the projects. That's an issue that you take to the project manager.
Right.
Okay? So instead of taking it there, they called ACS and had the children removed. Now, it's illegal for them to remove children like that simply because they have had a case similarly some years before that had been litigated through the courts. And the courts had decided that it was illegal to remove children from a home and claim that it was disarray or whatever if the disarray is not really part of the parents' fault within the home. So they were claiming that she, the elderly lady, who was the guardian to the children, had got up there and tore down the ceiling.
That lady was about this big.
Yeah, tiny.
That lady
So
was that
couldn't she have taken them to court?
Well, when you're taking people to court, you can take them to court, but you need legal representation who's going to help you do that.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's very difficult to find legal representation because you don't have the money to pay for it. And they have you running back and forth, so even if you have the money or the wherewithal to do it, you have to stop running back and forth to now find another lawyer who's going to take your case. You know, it's who's going to do that or who can do both or whatever. Because one of the main things that they do is that they have a pool of attorneys that represent the child. So that's one of the main things they're going to do is give your child an attorney. And that the attorney is going to decide what your child wants or doesn't want, or what is in the best interest of your child. That this is how it works in this system that we live in within the United States.
Okay. For questions.
No, I would rather have finished.
Okay. How you first got started, my understanding, is people seeing you advocate for your own son and the others.
Yes, that was part of it.
And then they gravitated to you, can you help me? They didn't know anything about, they knew you and the other parents were doing something to advocate and to stand up for your children. And that's a story in itself, how you got involved. You didn't all of a sudden one day say, I'm going to advocate for children taken by ACS.
Well, actually, I've never said I was going to advocate for children that was taken from ACS. God sent me those children and their parents. I wrote on my flyer, and we wrote on our flyer, do you need help? Are your children in trouble? We didn't say what kind of trouble your children was in or anything. And actually, we really assumed that people would respond who had children who were in juvenile justice. That's what we really expected. And when we opened our doors, there were people who came with children who were juvenile, who had juvenile justice cases with their children. And as a matter of fact, when you're working with foster care, and you see the children, many of them have juvenile justice issues once they get into foster care. It's almost like it's like a driving force that leads you from foster care right to the jail. Something about the way the system works is so disabling that you want to act out, you want to yell, you want to scream, you want to do something, and that takes you right into the prison industrial complex as a child. So when we did this flyer, we opened the doors and the people start coming. And they said that when they read the flyer, they thought that this would be a good place for them to come for their juvenile, not juvenile, but for the child protective issues.
Mm-hmm.
And as I had said earlier, we were really very fortunate that we had Renee Jackson with us at that time, who had just retired. And she retired one day and was in our office the next day as a full-time volunteer. And she had worked both in juvenile justice and in foster care. Now, the way I got started was a little before that, but Renee knew why I was doing the work or whatever. I started when my son, Salaam, one of the Central Park Five, was caught up in the juvenile justice system. So there were a number of children in that particular situation who were in prison. And that was my first experience going into prison and seeing all those children that were in prison. You know, it was a shocker when you see all these children who are behind bars. And I remember at one point he had asked us to help the children, help some of these other children. Mm-hmm. And so I had told him I would, but he had to do something for me and that we would help some of these other children as well, so he did what I told him I wanted him to do, and we started helping some of the other children who were incarcerated as well, because there were children who were being denied their rights, there were children who were being denied visitation, there were children who were receiving punishments for stuff they may or may not have done without due process, because in the juvenile justice system at that time there was only one ombudsman, that's the attorney that represents the children. There was only one for the entire state. So by the time he got to your case on his desk, you might have served your punishment.
Yeah, because to me, seems like they drag their foot on the children. Mm-hmm. Cases. Why?
Well, in juvenile justice, they don't necessarily drag their feet as much because when the judge says, you be here with these documents, usually the other side shows up with the documents, or they ask for an extension ahead of time, so it's like a different type of process. Foster care, when you're in a child protective system, you're practicing a law that's unknown to man. They don't teach this in any kind of place. It's just something you experience once you get there. So various legal practices that you've learned while you were in law school, they don't do. Or they do, but they do it differently. It's very different, because if the judge says to you, you come here, I'm going to give you 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever the time limit is, and you bring XYZ and you show up without XYZ, in the regular court system there are penalties. But in juvenile, in foster care, all they do is give you some more weeks to show up with this stuff. So it's like a whole different kind of animal. You go there and you say, well, I've taken the parenting class, I did the drug treatment this, I did that, I did the other, and the judge might say, well, where's the paperwork? Nobody has given me anything to show you've done any of this stuff.
Because my girlfriend had her child, her granddaughter, ever since she was small. Mm-hmm. And right now, her case worker do not have really, the judge is asking her, this girl is 16 years old now, mm-hmm. and they don't have, the social worker don't have half of the paper they're supposed to have. And I'm looking at her, they gotta be kidding.
Well, they might have them, but that doesn't mean they're gonna free them up. And then seeing that other piece in terms of the paperwork and stuff, that's why we tell people when you're in these cases,